I'll talk a bit about what to expect in the decade ahead. It's been the year gone by has been a year like none it has been a year like none other. I don't think any of us sitting here would have this time last year if we were asked, would we actually be working from home? Would we be able to do what we needed to do online? Would we never take flights? Would have actually said the probability of that happening is like zero. But it has happened. And I think what's incredible is the way that both organizations and consumers have actually adapted to this new reality. I think what happened over the last year is well known. And so what I'm going to talk about more is to say, in the light of what has happened, what can we really look forward to over the decade ahead? A little bit of rear view mirror gazing. FMCG in India was actually growing at a good clip over the last decade. We'd seen over, depending on the year, between 12 to 15%, 12 to 18% growth year on year. And growth driven both by volume as well as price premiumization. The fundamental drivers of growth have been just very strong economics on the back of affluence, nuclearization of families, and growing urbanization. So very strong macroeconomic fundamentals. However, the last year has changed this pattern of growth. We've seen certain categories like staples, fresh food, hygiene and household care products, personal care, really showing rapid growth. We tracked this very closely every month last year, and in fact, we did specific consumer research across, we did about 5 waves of research to really understand how consumer behavior was changing. And we saw that a set of these categories were showing very, very strong, stable growth. There were a few other categories that actually within FMCG that showed some slowdown, specifically those that required out-of-home consumption, packaged food and beverage, cosmetic and makeup, which is not visible behind a mask or is not needed when you're at home. But we're starting to see recovery in those as well. What's more important though is to say, how is this going to change going forward? And I wanted to put out for you 9 key themes that we see on how consumer behavior is getting reshaped. I bucket these themes into 3 parts. Trends that are a reversal of what we've seen in the past, trends that are an acceleration, and new habits that were completely unexpected and we'd never seen before. The trends that are an acceleration of existing trends are those that we actually believe will continue to exist going forward, because these were already existing secular trends and are just getting further accelerated. And specifically within these is the importance of digital, an accelerated adoption of e-commerce and O2O, greater focus on health and wellness, as well as the rise of what I call the smart shopper, who's somebody who's using digital much more actively as part of his or her purchase process. We've seen over the last 1 year, e-commerce as a proportion of sales going up significantly. We've seen a 30% increase in consumers who actually use e-commerce. And this is an acceleration of the trend to the extent of about 2 to 3 years of the past growth rates that we had seen before. More importantly, consumers who engage in e-commerce are engaging in e-commerce through a much wider basket of categories, including CPG products. From a health and wellness standpoint, while health was always important, the Indian consumer didn't always make healthy choices, either in the food she ate or the kinds of products that she procured. But we've seen a step change in that. The new habits that we're starting to see are what we call a remote way of living, where there's a lot more happening inside the home, a lot more do-it-yourself, whether it's from a personal care standpoint, whether that's spa kits or do-it-yourself hair color and so on. A lot more do-it-yourself in food, where consumers are now cooking a much wider repertoire of products and are using a lot of cooking aids and kits to be able to do that themselves. And then, of course, a much greater focus on hygiene than ever before. We've all been washing our hands more frequently than we ever have, but we've also seen a lot more behavior, whether it's in terms of just health and hygiene, becoming more apparent. The trends that we see that may likely get reversed going forward are a much greater focus on larger brands because of just greater trust and availability of those brands. Much more trading down as opposed to before. Pre-COVID, India had one of the highest levels of trading up and premiumization across the world, with over 30% of consumers in CPG actually trading up for superior products, trading up to buy more expensive brands. That has actually gotten reversed with a lot more bargain hunting, a lot more price consciousness. We do believe, though, that trend is going to start to reverse, and we're starting to see that already in the last 3 months. And last but not the least, it's what I call bringing the outside inside, where people are still consuming products that they consumed outside of home, but in larger packs, in stay-at-home occasions. I mean, instead of going to the cinema, they're sitting together and watching TV, a movie as a family. And eating popcorn out of a bag rather than in a cinema. But again, this we expect to go back, because as we speak to consumers, they're very keen to actually get out of the home sooner rather than later. The backdrop of these themes actually provides very important context as we think about opportunities ahead, and as we also think about new spaces and new behaviors that one could go after. One data point I wanted to share is that changing consumer behavior and habits is one of the hardest things and we all know that. Getting them to try new brands, getting them to create new habits is really hard. But in times of crisis and in times like these, actually consumer propensity to try a new habit and try a new brand actually goes up many fold. And it therefore presents a tremendous opportunity to topple league tables and to create offerings that have a much higher likelihood of getting adopted than ever before. As we look ahead, there are many opportunities within the FMCG space. Overall penetration across multiple categories continues to be low, showing much greater headroom for growth. Even categories that are well penetrated have significant opportunity for premiumization, again offering new opportunities for growth. An important element in all of this is the income pyramid in the country, where if you look at the top two segments, which I call the affluent and elite, the affluent are consumers with a household income of greater than 10 lakhs. That segment together is about 12% of Indian households today and account for about 27% of total spending. In the next 10 years, that segment is going to account for close to 50% of spending in the country. And that presents very interesting opportunities and a very different shape of consumption to what we've seen before. What is important as we look ahead is not just to think about winning either at the top end or at the bottom, but really that there is opportunity in every segment. So there's opportunity at the premium end, there's opportunity among the middle class, which is the blue block, and there's opportunity in the next billion, which is the class that is entering the consuming population and buy sachets and lower price point products. And therefore, as a country, we've got now sizable opportunity at each segment, and with a clear set of choices for players to think about which of these to operate in or to straddle across all segments. As we think about India, some of the common beliefs of what are the primary drivers of consumption is that consumption is driven by the youth. It is, supported by rapid urbanization. Men drive a lot of decisions and control the wallet. The reality, however, is that it's actually quite different. It's the middle and older age groups of the population that actually is where both the population growth is going to come. More importantly, that's where today the wealth and the consumption is actually collated. So segments above 35 years of age are really those that are going to drive the lion's share of consumption going forward. The youth are very important to target in terms of making a brand attractive, making a brand cool, and of course there are certain categories where the youth continues to be important, but it is very important to win in the 35 plus, especially in the 35 to 60 year age group. The second thing is that urbanization is not as rapid. We see urban population growing at, or the salience of urban population growing at not more than 1 to 2 percentage points a year. But more importantly, the real growth that is going to come in consumption is really in the tier 1 to tier 4 cities. These cities are going to grow from being about 30% of total consumption to becoming over 42% of consumption. And that growth is a very important space for organizations to capture. Rural continues to be significant, while it's going to reduce in salience from 54 to 42%. In absolute size, it's still very significant. More importantly, rural cannot be viewed as single block. We need to segment rural. And in fact, there are parts of rural which are actually more affluent and more attractive even than an average tier 3 city. So segmenting rural, identifying the key sub-districts to go after becomes very, very important. And last but not the least, my favorite theme is the importance of women. For the first time in the history of India, enrollment of girls in primary, high schools has actually overtaken that of men. What that really translates into is that over the next decade, we will have more women, more educated women entering the consuming class. We will have more working women entering the working population. The presence of working women fundamentally changes the consumption habits of a country. The propensity to spend more on CPG products and to premiumize, the need for more aids and more value-added products, whether it's cooking aids or whether it is personal care products, whether it's beauty products, goes up significantly. And this is going to create a fundamental reshaping of the kind of consumption that we've seen in the country. There are new sources of competition opening up. We see value players at the bottom end of the market starting to become sizable and very profitable. We see unexpected sources of competition like, digital first players, whether in the CPG space or even those providing solutions, who are actually operating in the same demand spaces as the more traditional ones. So the competitive landscape is actually completely different and is going to be very different from what we've seen so far. The go-to-market landscape as well is very, very different. We are seeing traditional trade, modern trade, and e-commerce coexisting for a long time. The relative shape of these is actually going to change. We see e-commerce growing at double the rate of traditional trade going forward. But traditional trade is going to continue to be very significant and to be a mainstay going forward. So the coexistence of these channels is very important. The important question is really not about which of these is more significant, but really to cut this by category and by brand to say which of these channels is really relevant and which outlets within those matter most to your brand or to your category. And therefore, go-to-market is going to become a lot more nuanced and a lot more complex going forward. Each of these channels is going to get more demanding in terms of the need for investment and trade spending, and is going to require a lot more digital and a lot more analytics in the way that they are served, as well as in the way that one spends behind them. So a one-size-fits-all approach cannot work, and really a more nuanced approach is going to be important. Layering on to this, the fact that digital is causing massive disruption in go-to-market models, where we're starting to see B2B e-commerce, for example, becoming a very relevant and widespread channel, which is a real choice as compared to the classical distribution model that players have adopted. Direct to consumer actually coming of age, where whether it is food or personal care, we're starting to see sizable players who are digital first, both building brands much faster and starting to become very relevant with consumers, changing the need for the nature of delivery completely, and the overall logistics infrastructure is changing. So again, what worked over the last decade is not what's going to work going forward, and a re-evaluation of these models starts to become very, very important. On a completely different note, as consumers are becoming more conscious of health and hygiene and wellness. They're also becoming a lot more conscious of the environment and climate change. Players are starting to take, very conscious actions in terms of packaging, whether it's about recycling packaging, reducing plastic, and rethinking the nature of packaging going forward is going to become, an important element as you take a 10-year view. Employee expectations are also changing dramatically. The need for a reskilled, upskilled workforce, the need for faster turnaround, more attractive career paths, and really thinking about how you manage your team and keeping them engaged and really adapting to a younger workforce is going to become very important. And last but not the least, at every step of the way, technology is going to fundamentally disrupt the FMCG value chain, whether it's blockchain or voice activated technology or even machine learning. There are, several use cases at each step of the value chain that can provide significant efficiency as well as greater effectiveness in the models that can be adopted. So as I pull it all together, it's a very exciting time and a time like no other. I know it's been a hard year for all of us, and it's been a hard year for many organizations. But it's also, in adversity comes opportunity. And this is a quote from Frank Blake, and it's one of my favorite quotes as I look ahead to say, though the current times are extraordinarily difficult, it is a unique and privileged time to lead. And you have the opportunity to determine how your company will look back on this moment with pride in the next 5 years. And I think this is something that holds true for all of us, whether it's our company, our brand, or even us as individuals, to see how did we use and create opportunity in this adversity.